did enslave white people in mass, right? If that turns out to be true, then black people are going to be forced to do the same thing they want white people to do, and that's take responsibility for enslaving them. And that's not something a lot of black people want to do, because when that narrative gets put on the table, it's gonna force black people to realize, oh, that might change the whole dynamic, even about reparations and everything else, because then white folks will be talking about, oh, well, we're even. And believe it or not, that was a very central part of Shakka Diop's narrative. And a lot of people chose not to focus on that. For whatever reason, they just wanted to sweep it under the rug. You understand what I'm saying? But in this lecture here, we're not sweeping it under the rug. In this presentation, black masters, white slaves, it ain't gonna be no sweeping it under the rug. It's gonna be looking at the facts. It's gonna be looking at the documentation. And it's gonna be coming to terms with some facts and with some truths. So what I'm here to do this evening is to let you know, number one, that this presentation and this lecture exists. And I'm here to present it to you to make you actually want to come and learn truthfully the whole facts behind the whole situation. Or you could be on the outside and still wonder about it and still continue with the same old narrative. And when you continue with the same old narrative, you're going to also see why it's not going anywhere. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to furnish all of us, you, me, your family, I'm trying to furnish all of us with a different narrative so that when we encounter white people, it's not the same old conversation. Oh, well, you did this to me. And you did this to us, and you did. It's the same. We've been saying that for how long? How long since slavery been over? We've been saying that, and ain't nothing. In fact, what they've done is they've used it to their advantage. Do you know how they've used it to their advantage? They've used it to their advantage, by creating movie after movie after movie about black people being slaves. They did Roots. They did 12 Years a Slave. They did what's the other one? Oh, Django Unchained. They did all of these slave movies, right? So being a little black child in America and growing up and seeing cinema, what is going to be your self-narrative in your head about the history of your people when you're sitting in these classrooms with these other people? All you're thinking about is your legacy is slavery. That's it. And that's the message those movies send. All of these movies coming out of Hollywood start historically with us at one period and one period only, slavery, and it creates one narrative: black people being enslaved by white people. Now, see, some white people feel guilty, but you also got to realize it gives other white people a superiority complex.
How so?
It allows them to push the narrative that, number one, it was a naturally ordained situation. Didn't they use the Bible to condone slavery? Slaves be good to your master. Well, they weren't talking to white slaves. They weren't talking to Spanish slaves or even Chinese slaves. And Chinese people enslaved their own. But that's not who that was for. That was for us. They used that whole narrative, the whole Shem, Japan, the whole Ham, Shem, and Japheth thing. You know, the whole curse of Ham thing. All of that was about us, written into their documentation. You understand what I'm saying? And so what I'm saying is that it gives them a superiority complex. Just think about this. And this is the real weird part of the whole conversation. Jewish people love to talk about being enslaved in Egypt, don't they? The whole Exodus story, right? But in the very same token, they don't ever talk about black people being the ancient Egyptians. So the whole thing is just a really weird dichotomic kind of conversation. You understand what I'm saying? You want to talk about being enslaved in Egypt, but at the same token, you don't want to admit that the ancient Egyptians were black. So that
a big problem with the truth of history, particularly when it comes to Africans, particularly when it comes to Egypt, the Moorish dynasties, and other aspects of history. one has to wonder why they are so desperate to subvert the truth and alter history. These images may give you a clue as to their reasoning. What you're looking at here is a famous painting by one of the most famous Orientalist painters. The Eurocentrists want to convince you that this gentleman and those that look like him were a typical representation of the famous Moors, who basically ruled and civilized much of Europe for over 700 years. In fact, the title of this famous painting is The Beggar. The Beggar. This man is a beggar. And that may lead to give us a clue as to why they want to change history, because they're not too proud of it. This is another famous painting. It is called The Captives. Now see, the Eurocentrists want to make all of the North Africans white, when this is a representation of white North Africans. This man who is the beggar, and these ladies who are the captives. They are a member of the harem of the Moors. What did the Moors look like? The Eurocentrists want to make the Moors white. This is a famous painting called The Guard of the Harem. That is a Moor. This clearly African Negro who is the guard of the harem. That is the member of the harem. This is what they don't want you to know about their history of enslavement by the black Moors. Truth is truth. Black people, African Americans, are not in denial about the truth of their history nor their enslavement. So why can they not simply accept the truth? This painting is called the Humane. The Humane was a Moorish bathhouse. Historically, many Europeans considered it a sin to even take a bath, and they did not bathe. So one of the things that the Moors did is they introduced over 700 bathhouses to Spain and much of Europe. This is the man who's running it, the black man, the Moor. This is called the letter. The man who is reading the letter is also the black man, the Moor. Much of Europe was illiterate, and that included the kings and the queens. They were illiterate. They did not read or write. This is called the money changer. These are two black men, even though this one is lighter skinned. I want to go through these images much quicker. This one is called the rug merchant. This is the rug merchant, the Negro. This is called the scholar. This is the scholar, the Negro. This is called the tiger hunt. These are the two who are on the tiger hunt, the Negroes. And this one is called War Dance of Sultan of Zanzibar's Troops. The troops of the Sultan of Zanzibar are these predominantly Negro Moors. This is truth. This is history. And they want to subvert it again and change it. And you're going to see, at least get a clue as to some of the reasons why they are so desperate. This one is called the Tribal Chief Swearing Fidelity to the Sultan of Morocco. It was printed in 1892. Take a good look. These are not Caucasians. That's what they want to do. They want to make everybody white. This is called the tiger hunt. The Moors on the tiger hunt. And in this painting, this image, it is called the Sultan. Okay? As you can clearly see, this is a Negro. There are no Caucasians here. This is called the Pasha's favorite tiger. That's what it's called. A Pasha was a high official. This one is called the Moorish Guard, the metal workers. This is to show you that the positions of distinction and honor. This is called the favorite. There we have the Moorish chieftain, and that is his favorite member of his harem. This is what they want to be in denial about. They want to make the Moors look like this, but they cannot do that because that is not historically true. This is called the Arab Prince, another Negro. Here is a relatively modern photograph. It is called the Sultan's Black Guard. These are all black gentlemen here, these Sultan's Guards. This is what they want to be in denial about. This is clearly a European. This is a white girl. This is a white woman. The Sultan pardons Shahrazad. This is the black man, the Negro, the Moor, who's pardoning her.
You just don't. I've never seen a movie where I've seen white people enslaved. I've never read in a book. You know, they don't teach you in school about white people being enslaved ever. I haven't been taught that. I haven't seen that in any textbooks that were given to me. As of recent, from doing my own research, I found out that, you know, white people were slaves for a long period of time, man, throughout history. As a matter of fact, I think I was just doing some research on white slavery, where, for example, between the 16th century, I think the 16th to the 18th century, white people were taken. They said there were pirates from Africa who had ships, and they brought them to, and I think they're mostly probably Islam, but these people came from Africa, from what was the places I wrote down the places, Morocco, Algeria, Libya. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but they came on ships to Europe. They took white slaves from Spain, Italy, France, where else? Spain, Portugal, Italy, France, England, the Netherlands. Men, women, and children took them from Europe and brought them over to Morocco and Libya and sold them, man. They said, I think between 1.25 million in total between, I think 2 to 3 centuries, where pretty much brown complected people. Now, I'm not saying all blacks are the same people. I'm not saying they were African Americans or so-called African Americans, but these were people from Africa. I'm assuming some of them had similar to my complexion or darker, who enslaved white people, men, women, and children. Brought them on ships, man. And they did this for about 300 years, man. And again, in between the 8th and the 15th century, the Moors, they enslaved, they're mostly Muslims, and they enslaved white Christians between the 8th and the 15th century. So for almost about 700 years, man, where they dominated Spain and a lot of the most powerful European countries. I think it was Spain and a few other countries that were pretty dominant during that time between the 8th and 15th century. And the and I guess that's what Shakespeare was talking about in his book when he wrote Othello. And I used to always wonder why Othello was a black general. And of course, Iago was one of Othello's, one of the ship, the ship help, or one of the ship employees that worked for Othello, and he caused the whole fiasco, and he tricked Othello into thinking that Desdemona was cheating on him. But the black military general had affairs with the white lady, with the white girl. And I think that spoke to something a lot deeper. It was the white man's hatred for the fact that, because I was wondering, why was Iago, what was his aim? Why did he do that in terms of tricking Othello into thinking Desdemona had cheated on him? And I think that had a bigger paradigm in terms of whites feeling that they hated the black general, because at that time, the time that Shakespeare was talking about, blacks ruled over whites. They had them as slaves, man.
French Navy. But he also managed all of the colonies. So his expertise was colonial geography. So when the French came and they colonized all of West Africa, and they colonized parts of North Africa, including the areas near Egypt, right? Who do you think was managing all of that? He was. He was managing their colonies. So he had first crack at a lot of things that a lot of other people did not see. So you got to understand, all these men, most of these early historians in Europe, many of them study what's called colonial geography. Most people, the average person studying geography doesn't know about that, because there's technically no more colonies. So these people were studying places that they actually owned. So if you talk about French Guinea-Bissau and West Africa, they owned that. You talk about Senegal being a Francophile country speaking French, they owned Senegal. You understand? So their knowledge of the histories of these places was much deeper than most people understood. Listen to what he said. Cool. The black right. Now this is in the 19th century. Okay, the early 19th. Now in 1844, what was our people doing?
1844?
Yeah, in America, what was black people doing in 1844?
Picking cotton.
We was picking cotton.
Right.
So we were picking cotton. We didn't know nothing about this. We didn't know nothing about this. This man at that time, look, 1844, do you see it?
Yes.
All right, this book is published in 1844, which means, here he says, the black race, long the most numerous, first overpowered. Hold on, did I mention that he was the head of the French Navy?
Yes.
Did I mention that he studied colonial geography? Did I mention that he managed all of the colonies? Right. Check out what he said. Now this is in the 19th century while we enslaved. Look at what he says. At the same time that the French are also enslaving the Africans as well, look at what he says. The black race. Now, man, as the head of the Navy, what's your job? Your job is to know what the most important threat is, or what the most important potential threat is, which means you have to know the true identity and nature of a threat that has yet to happen. Now, see, everybody else on the ground is looking at it one way, but look how he was looking at it. And he wrote in his book, the General Outline of Africa, the black race, long the most numerous, first overpowered and dominated the whites. But the latter, meaning the whites, having gradually multiplied, shook off the yoke of their masters. I'll read that again. The latter, meaning the white people, having gradually multiplied, shook off the yoke of their masters. Who were the masters? The blacks. The black race. I'll read it again, because everybody ain't got reading comprehension. The black race, long the most numerous, first overpowered and dominated the whites. But the latter, meaning the whites, having gradually multiplied. So if they had to multiply to get out of their bondage from us, that means we had them for what? Generations. Remember when Jabari said, oh, but we didn't enslave their children, and we didn't have them intergenerate. Like Dr. Clark said, every time you speak, you only tell me what you have not read. Okay? Look at this. He says, but the latter, meaning white people, having gradually multiplied, shook off the yoke of their masters. The ex-slave, the white man, he now, in modern times, he becomes the ex-slave. So you don't think of the white man as the ex-slave. We always think of him as the ex-master, as our former master. You never think of him as your former slave. He tells you right here, the ex-slave becoming master in his turn, condemned the blacks to bear the chains that he had just broken. Centuries have passed, but his anger is not yet appeased. So in other words, what he's documenting is that when blacks and whites first met in history, the blacks dominated the whites, overpowered them, and had condemned them to slavery. And that the white man and woman, by multiplying, they broke the yoke of slavery, they broke the yoke of being enslaved on the black people, and then they used that as a justification to turn around and enslave their former masters. That's what happened. But they don't want to tell you that part, because then they have to admit that they were conquered by us. Now, how can you admit that you're conquered by us in one breath, but in the next breath you're telling people that we can't think, we can't spell, we have brains like monkeys? Didn't they say that? Didn't they say we belong to the monkey tribe and all this other stuff? So it's gonna make you feel good to admit that you were conquered and enslaved by monkeys? Does that make sense to you? Of course not. You're gonna try and bury it, which is what they did. You're gonna try and no. And you can't say that they used that. You can't say, oh no, he only wrote that to justify enslaving black people. Well, if you think that that's what they wrote to justify enslaving black people, then you really don't know scholarship. you really don't know that the particular scholarship that they produced to justify enslaving black people. But I'm giving this to my brother, right? Look, don't ever look, let me tell you something. I'm not stupid. I know, but they always say never forget where you come from. I came from the
Coming at you again. Just wanted to respond back. I had got an email sent to me. A sister had asked a question if I knew anything about white slavery. And I do, and I'll be happy to share the information with you. I'll give you a brief overview kind of about white slavery, what I do know about it. I took a couple notes, and I also want to share with you a couple of books. I got a nice library here at the crib. Two books that I would probably recommend for you to get for a good foundation of white slavery is They Were White and They Were Slaves. It's by Michael Hoffman. It's a decent book. As well as White Cargo. This is by two authors, Don Jordan and Michael Walsh. So again, White Cargo and They Were White and They Were Slaves. Two books. There are other books that are out there, but I'll share with you what I do know about it. White slavery has been in America. There have been white slaves in America for over 100 years. I'm talking about the hidden history of white people not knowing that they were slaves. This happened for over 100 years. And there's a professor at Yale, David Bryan Davis is his name. And the quote that's coming from David Bryan Davis, October 11th, 1990, is that as early as the 14th to the 15th century, white slaves were shipped to multiple countries. It was labeled as like a booming slave trade during that time on the markets in the Black Sea coast, in the Italy, Spain, Egypt, and the Mediterranean islands, as well as Barbados to Virginia. I'm going to focus right now, particularly on, since we're dealing with America, the Barbados to Virginia connection. Again, that's the 14th to the 15th century of white slaves being used. Barbados during that time would literally beat their white slaves to death. I think you probably need a good synopsis or picture of exactly what was going on, where these slaves were coming from. I'm sure if you have any basic history about it, you would know that the slaves came from England. A good idea of kind of like the way to see what that life was like is to study Oliver Twist. That's a good movie for y'all to check out. It'll explain to you that the English slums of the 17th, the 18th, and the 19th century, they were considered the pits of white suffering. Maggots all in the trash. They were eating scraps. They were cold, wearing rags for clothing. Very, very poor condition.
A very different story. Up to one half of all the arrivals in the American colonies were white slaves, and they were America's first slaves. These whites were slaves for life long before blacks ever were. And this white slavery was even hereditary. White children were born to white slaves, and they were also enslaved. Whites were auctioned on a block with children sold and separated from their parents. Wives were sold and separated from their husbands. Meanwhile, you had free black property owners walking the streets of northern and southern American cities, while white slaves were being worked to death in the sugar mills of Barbados and Jamaica in the West Indies and in the tobacco plantations of Virginia.
The party was founded by freed black slaves and anti-slavery white Americans. The Republican Party is the only party in America that was founded by black people. Not the Libertarian Party, not the Progressive Party, not the Democrat Party, not the Green Party. The only party ever founded by black people, by black Americans, is the Republican Party. The Republican Party today still stands for the same principles that it stood for in 1854 when it was founded. Check this out. Let me explain something to you. I'm about to drop some straight knowledge on y'all. The Republican Party, every principle that the Republican Party stands for is a principle that you can use if you were coming out of slavery. understand that most of my constituents that I'm fighting for are in slavery. So the principles that I stand for gotta be things that can help them when they come out of slavery. For example, the Second Amendment, standing for the right to bear arms. The reason why the Republican Party of today, the Republican Party of 1854, if I'm a slave, don't I need a weapon more than anybody else in the whole country, right? The Democrat Party, even then, was a party of slavery. The Democrat Party was against slaves having guns. And they weren't just against slaves having guns, they was against anyone having a weapon who wasn't a part of the government. Just the same policy they stand for today, they stood for in 1854 during slavery. Understand this, and I'm going to go through policy from policy, but I want to start with that one just so y'all can see off top that the Democrat Party was for gun control then. They didn't want black people to have guns then, and they didn't want no free white Americans to have guns then. The only people they wanted to have guns was the government, like they only want the government to have guns now, right? Because during that time, they could control the population if the government had guns, correct?
A black man. He's obviously a black man. Okay. And we're going to look at more pictures of this particular black man. And then we're going to talk about this particular black man. But before we do, I want to go to Wikipedia. We're going to look at the Arab slave trade. And I'm going to read this. Arab slave trade. The Arab slave trade was the practice of slavery in the Arab world, mainly in Western Asia, North Africa, East Africa, and certain parts of Europe, such as Iberia and Sicily, during their period of domination by Arab leaders. The trade was focused on the slave markets of the Middle East, North Africa, and the Horn of Africa. People traded were not limited to a certain race, ethnicity, or religion, and included Arabs and Berbers. I'm going to make another video talking about Berbers too, because there's a lot of mythology about Berbers that I wanted to dispel also. Right now I'm going to focus on Arabs, especially during the trade's early days. So in other words, Arabs enslaved other Arabs, Berbers, and it was not limited to race. During the 8th and 9th centuries of the Fatimid Caliphate, most of the slaves were Slavic Eastern Europeans, called Sakaliba. However, slaves were drawn from a wide variety. Oh, by the way, you look at the etymology of the word slave. What does it say? Most of the slaves during the 8th and 9th centuries of the Fatimid Caliphate, most of the slaves were Slavic Eastern Europeans, white people. Most of them. And the word slave, actually, if you look at the etymology of it, that is where it comes from. It goes back to the root word for Slavic, and the phrase that they were called Slavs or slaves. There were so many that were enslaved. That's why the word evolved, slave. However, slaves were drawn from a wide variety of regions that included Mediterranean peoples, Persians, Turkic peoples from the Caucasus Mountains, regions such as Georgia, Armenia, and Circassia, white people again, and parts of Central Asia and Scandinavia, English, Dutch, and Irish, white again, Berbers from North Africa, and various other peoples of varied origins as well as those of African origins. Okay, let me jump down to what's important. I don't want to go through this whole thing. The famous 9th century Muslim author Al-Jahiz, an Afro-Arab and the grandson of a Zanj slave, wrote a book entitled Risalat Mufakharat al-Sudan ala al-Idan, treatise on the superiority of blacks over whites, in which he states that blacks have conquered the country of the Arabs as far as Mecca and have governed them. We defeated Du Nawas, Jewish king of Yemen, and killed all the Himyarite princes, but you, white people, have never conquered our country. Our people, the Zincs, Negroes, revolted 40 times in the Euphrates, driving the inhabitants from their homes and making Obala a bath of blood. Okay? And that was the famous 9th century Muslim author Al-Jahiz, an Afro-Arab. Okay? He also wrote are physically stronger than no matter what other people. A single one of them can lift stones of a greater weight and carry burdens such as several whites could not lift nor carry between them. They are brave, strong, and generous, as witness their nobility and general lack of wickedness. Okay, and the only point of any of this is that there's a lot of misconceptions about Arabs and what an Arab is. And the reason I started the video focusing on this man right here is because he is an Arab. And is very...
Managing their colonies and studying colonial geography, who knew that black people in ancient times had been the masters, and that we had indeed enslaved white people, and that white people had multiplied, which means we had them for generations. That's how they got free, multiplying. They increased their numbers, and by increasing their numbers, they were able to get out from under that yoke. And then years later, what do they say? He says the ex-slave becoming master in his turn, condemning the blacks to do what? To bear the chains that he himself had just broken. Centuries have passed, but his anger is not yet appeased. And you know why? You know why I wanted to read that to you? Because all I ever see on Facebook is, why do white people hate us so much? Why do white people hate us so much? Well, maybe if your ass read a history book, you would know why. Now you know why when he sees you in the streets, he shoots you. Because he fears you. Didn't Frances Cress Welsing say it was fear? She told you it was genetic annihilation.
Now, right? Because during that time, they could control the population if the government had guns. Correct? The slaves, if you're a slave, the first thing you want to do coming out of slavery is be able to protect yourself and your property and your family. I'm preaching right now, but y'all don't hear me. Secondly, the Republican Party of 1854 stood for a limited government. If I'm a slave, do you think I want a big government or a limited government? I want a limited government, right? Because I just worked for the man for the last 400 years. The last thing I want is the man over me telling me what to do. So the free white slaves, along with the free black slaves, wanted limited government. The same way we want limited government today. Who is arguing for a big government? I'm preaching, but y'all don't hear me. Every single policy that the Republican Party stood for in 1854, they did it for people coming out of slavery, and they never wanted to go into slavery. See, I'm reading The Conscious Conservative by Barry Goldwater. They never wanted to go into slavery, so they never want to give up their freedom. And that's the reason why they had sympathy for those who didn't have their freedom. I'm preaching, right? They had sympathy for the people who didn't have their freedom because they knew if the government can do that to them, they can do it to us. So, of course, you want limited government coming out of slavery because slavery was a government program, right? Coming out of slavery, what do you think you want? Low taxes or high taxes? Come on now, this is basic common sense, y'all, right? See, I got to start breaking it down like this because I feel like I'm telling these Democrats these things and they acting like I'm making this up. No, the Democrats was the party of slavery then and they're the party of slavery today. They want to take freedom away. To have your freedom taken is to be a slave. That's all they want to do. For you to be taxed to death, right, is just for you to be a slave, right? So coming out of slavery, if I'm a slave, I want low taxes. I want low taxes on the rich. I want low taxes on the poor. I want low taxes on the middle class. I want low tax on everybody because if I'm poor and I ever get rich and I'm a slave, the last thing I want to do is government take my money. They just took my freedom. So the last thing I want them to do is take my money. I'm preaching, but y'all don't hear me right now, right?
Let's look at the etymology of the word slave. Because like I said, whenever you show the truth about black people, their catchword is always slave. They don't have to have any truth or fact and they never can back it up, but they just, to them, it's a plausible explanation. If there were black people present, they were present as slaves, owned by white people, of course. Now let's look at the word slave. Come from the 13th century, late 13th century, a person who is the property of another. That word, this is the online etymology dictionary. It is from the Old French esclave, from medieval Latin sclavus, slave. Let's see. Italian would be siervo. French would be esclave. Spanish would be esclavo. Originally, it was Slav. So called because of the many Slavs who were sold into slavery by conquering peoples. This sense development arose in the consequence of the wars waged by Otto the Great and his successors against the Slavs, a great number of whom they took captive and sold into slavery. So anytime you use the word slave and you're trying to act as though that word is unique or specific to black people, you are ignoring the fact and thereby revealing your total, utter ignorance. Because the word slave, no matter who you apply it to, basically is giving tribute to its origins, which were the Slavic people, because they were so often taken captive and sold into slavery.
The 1400s, why did he make Othello into a general? And I was like, well, during that time, I thought we were slaves. That's all you hear is about blacks being slaves. And it's almost like if you go to some of the so-called Hebrew Israelites will tell you that blacks or quote-unquote African Americans have been slaves since the beginning of time, which is more bullshit. But yeah, I think that play kind of touched on that in terms of, whites being angry that the blacks did have whites under control. They had them in bondage, basically. They enslaved Spain, Portugal, and I think it was another country that the Moors had a tight control over. A lot of these Moors were brown complected individuals. Not to say that they were quote unquote African Americans, but they were. A lot of them did have pigmentation in their skin. Okay, and you can look at the region that they were from. That region still has brown complected people. Okay, and they took over white people, men, women, and children. So it was normal to see a black that was a general who had a white female. Almost equivalent to now where you'll see like the white man being the captain in the USA and today, blacks being submissive to whites in terms of the hierarchy, where now it's more common to see a black white male who's the captain of the ship. And she's in love, or he may be in love with the black female on board, who may be beautiful, and how would the average black take that? But yeah, man. My point is, they never talk about Hollywood. Never talks about white slavery, and it's existed. They said it was normal during the Roman days. They had a lot of poor Italians were slaves. And I just think all these movies where they make every movie that whenever they talk about slavery or whenever they say there's a slavery movie being made, you can almost bet that the narrative will include whites being the slave masters and blacks being the slaves, or copper colored people or people of my complexion, or quote unquote African Americans. And I always like to stress that term because I don't like the term African Americans, but that's just to let the viewer know who I'm referring to. It always comes across as, my people being slaves. And I think it's just a way to, embarrass black people, one. Two, to systematically make black people think that their only place is as a slave, that we've always been slaves, and that we've had no other place in history. We were never rulers, and not only that, but people of brown complexion have never ruled over people of lighter hue. And that's just a falsehood, man. And you have very few whites that ever. I don't know if every white even knows about their history in terms of that. Because I mean, whenever you hear a white person who may admit that their people were slaves, it'll usually be some white person who's Irish, and he'll talk about, well, the people from England enslaved my ancestors. If he's Irish, meaning, the English enslaved the Irish, which is true. And you had the potato famine, the potato famine, and white Irish were made into slaves and things of that nature, and they endured some of the same, beatings as black slaves. But they never, and that's as far as you'll hear, so we were slaves too. But you'll never hear about, they'll never tell you, I don't know if other white people don't know or if they aren't aware, but they'll never tell you that it was dark-complected people who it wasn't only the Irish who were slaves to the English. It wasn't just white-on-white slavery, but in fact, people from Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands were taken from Europe and made slaves in Africa by brown and black complected people. They'll never tell you. They'll never talk about. I've never heard one white person talk about that.
Nah, dude, that's part of it. See, the problem is that we don't know how to see ourselves through the eyes of white people. We don't know what they see when they look at us. So if they look at us, and that shit is, we were talking about genetic memory and it's in the DNA, they remember that shit. Why you think they get so nervous when so many of us come around and move into their neighborhoods and all of that? Because we overpower all the time. Don't we overpower on the basketball court? Don't we overpower them in the boxing ring? Don't we overpower them on the football court? Don't we overpower them? No matter, we overpower them. And we overpower them in academia too. Yes, we do. Okay, yes, we do. You're going to find that out too. Here we go. Let's keep it popping. There he goes. The black race, this is it. The black race, long the most numerous, first overpowered and dominated the whites. But the latter, having gradually multiplied, shook off the yoke of their masters. These were the masters. The ex-slave, meaning the whites, right? Becoming master in his turn, condemned the blacks to bear the chains he had just broken. Centuries have passed, but his anger is not yet appeased. Yes. Hold on. Right? Now, reparations, if we're talking about this. Back on that faggot shit, waiting for reparations. Nah. Okay, look. Part of the reason they try to sell you that stuff about ancient Egypt being pacifist and all kind and humble is that they don't. All right, in ancient Egypt, what do they say about Set, the god Set?
Say that Set was he was the bad one.
He was the bad one, right? What do say? What do white people say about black people?
Oh, we the bad people. We bad.
Right. Mm-hmm. So what you did? So they're telling you your history. Everything that's bad is actually what? Black. No, but everything that's bad is going to actually be what? The opposite.
Oh, okay.
Good.
Right.
You understand?
But you said everything that's bad is...
Watch. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about.
The question you asked me.
What did they tell you Set was? They tell you Set was the bad god, right? Let's see if that's true. Here you go. The golden question. What about the letter Set? What are we to think about him? What does the Oxford Dictionary say? Now, mind you, all of this is from my course on ShakkaAhmoseUniversity.com. ShakkaAhmoseUniversity.com. You're going to see the link in the bottom of this video, okay? If the link is not in the bottom of the video, this is stolen information, right? So,
you white people who will admit that their people were slaves, they will never admit that their people were enslaved and brought to Africa on ships by other blacks. They will never, I've met a lot of white people throughout my 40 years on the planet. I've never heard of another white person say that or would be willing to admit to that. I've never seen a movie that showed a person of my complexion enslaving white people at all, let alone bringing them to another land to do servitude. Never seen it. You know what I'm saying? So it's crazy. It's not talked about. It wasn't presented to me when I was in high school and or middle school or elementary school. In any of the books I read, no one ever talked about whites being enslaved by blacks, or what you would call black people. Even
back in 1865 at this point, if I'm a Democrat back in 1865, what do you think I want? Low taxes or high taxes? I want to tax them freaking slaves to death. I'm already rich. See what I'm saying? I have money from generational wealth from the slave plantation. So for you to tax me would mean nothing, but you tax them into poverty, that would be great, because I'm going to pass my wealth on to my kids no matter what. So we're always going to be rich. But I don't want them to ever be able to get up here to where I am. Y'all
gotta consider that. Meneptah, who captured all those slaves that Diop was talking about, is a great grandson of this guy who's worshiping Set. Set I won. He's worshiping the deity that is the deity or the patronage of slavery. Right here. He is the god of foreign land, bringing captive foreigners to the king. Here you go. Now we're going to go and deal with this. Okay? Watch this. Matter of fact, we're going to deal with that. I'm going to skip that. Here we go. Watch this. The glaring omission. Okay? Now, I got to give you this. And then we're going to be done. Because if I give any more than this, I'm going to be in trouble. There's a lot more, but I'm not. Nah, we ain't doing a part two. They're going to come take my class and learn. But here we go. Watch this. This is Diop's superior translation of Shure. Now watch this. Edward Shure said something in his text. Okay? This is what he said. Here we go. We're going to read Diop. This is Shure's book, Les Grands Initiés, from which I quote at length in my course. If you take my course, Black Masters and White Slaves, on Shakka Ahmose University, he's talking about Edward Shure, and he's quoting Edward Shure. Listen to what Diop says about slavery in Africa, in ancient Egypt. He says, I wish I had your attention for this one. He says, Edward Shure no less surprisingly reports a portion of these legends about early domination by blacks. The black race ruled the globe. The blacks invaded southern Europe during prehistoric times. Their memory has been completely erased from our popular traditions. Did you hear that? That's very important. Their memory has been completely erased from our popular traditions. I wonder why. Okay? Nevertheless, they have left indelible traces. At the time of their domination, the blacks had religious centers in Upper Egypt and India. Their gigantic cities crenellated the mountains of Africa, Caucasia, and Central Asia. Their social organization was an absolute theocracy. Their priests possessed profound knowledge, the principle of the divine unity of the universe and the cult of the stars, which became Sabaeanism among the white. He conquered the people. You think he says, okay, now you're all going to be my subjects and we're going to live happily ever after. And no, nigga, you going to work. For free. Nigga, for free. That's what they did. Yeah. They put their asses to work for free. That's what them ancient Egyptian, African, hardcore, general king, god kings did. They wasn't no punks and pussies and faggots. No, they was not.
Even when you want to bring it up to date, man, what you think the most is doing up in Spain?
Come on, you know that. You know, but I don't even get into that. Hold on. Hey, let's continue.
But you got to deal with history. You're a scholar.
Let's continue.
But you still got to deal with the truth.
Yes. Yeah, you know that. Here we go. They had them doing what? Smelting metals. They said what? Smelting metals in immense furnaces worked by prisoners of war. So now you know how they had the iron metals, because they had their prisoners making them. They were smelting metal. Okay? They wasn't going to do that hard work. Look, when you got a whole country full of slaves, you can get to do it for you?
Man, you going in.
Yeah. They had a whole country full of slaves they went and got, and it was all white. Men, women, and children. That's right. For generations. Okay? Nah, we ain't with nah. There are those of us who are not interested in waiting for reparations. We're gonna do like our ancestors did, take what we want. Because that's what conquerors do. Isn't it? Isn't that what they do?
Right.
Isn't that what kings do?
That's right.
If you're not willing to take, don't call yourself a king. If you're not willing to support your black man who is willing to take, don't call yourself a queen.
That's right.
In fact, I hate to say it, you got some queens out here that's more king than the queens because they take. Let me show you the psychology though. Look at all these black women in the churches who love Obama, right? They still to this day, he's like their Jesus, right? But we'll go up to them with a microphone. I want you to do an experiment. And oh, it's old. I'm giving you gold. One Sunday, because right here, in this 2-block radius, there's so many people lining up for church in this whole area. It's number of black churches. Every other block. Or you going to come here on a Sunday morning. Get here like 10:30. You're going to be like, oh, shit.
Damn.
And wait till you see all the white tourists that's going into the churches. Buses lined up as far as you can imagine. Now watch this. Watch this. Oh, you didn't know about the racket in the industry?
I know about Calvin Butts and them. I didn't know it was that.
Oh, are you serious? Oh, Butts and them can't touch us. You gotta know why. We got a church here. We got a church around the corner. You got big ones, dude. You gotta see the crowds that be out front. But check it out. I want you to take your microphone. Listen. I want you to take your microphone, and I want you to go up to these black women that love Obama so much. 'Cause I'm gonna show you. You said Obama was the king because he was the president, right? You said to be the president, you gotta kill and be ruthless. Ask them. Say, so you love Obama, right? Oh yes, he was the best president. Ask them, how do you feel about the fact that Obama dumped more drones on innocent civilians and killed innocent men, women, and children than any other president in modern history? How do you feel about that? Just ask them.
We are committed.
All of a sudden, do you still think he's the greatest president? You do realize he's a killer. You do realize he killed many people. Men, women, and children. Yeah, absolutely. You realize that blood is on his hands. He gave the order. He's the commander-in-chief, right? Right?
Couldn't have happened without him.
There you go. So, what's the one with the nut and shell game?
Oh, I don't know the name of it.
All right. Okay. All right, cool. Words. Watch this. Now, this is Joe giving you the real translation. And then I'm going to show you what white people did to the book when they came to America. Watch this. It said this. It said, crushed by the first onslaught, the whites were taken into what captivity and became en masse the slaves of the blacks. That's Joe quoting Charest. That's Joe. Go to the footnotes. In the African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality, go to the footnotes. That's Joe quoting, in fact, I can tell you where to find it right now. Chapter 9, page 180, second paragraph, note number 3. Enter Joe. Okay? He says, crushed by the first onslaughts, the whites were taken into captivity and became en masse the slaves of the blacks, who forced them to work on stone to carry ore to their furnaces. You see that? So, force them to work on stone.
Because you look like you're a young dude, and you finally here to learn something.
Dude, force them to work on stone. Does this sound like servitude to you? Any of the stuff that I've described so far, hot brands, chains, farming for free, right? Keeping them for generations so that they gotta multiply to get free. Right? What else? Smelting, working in hot furnaces to smelt metals, just so you can make. Check out, you making weapons that they using to enslave more of you. That sound like servitude to you, bruh? I told them they didn't want it. And look, term. Why? Because the term came about from the field of philology, the study of language. You're not talking to a dummy. Okay? You can tell that shit and sell that shit to somebody else. Job just told you, right here. I'm going to read it again. He said, on the other hand, the state collected taxes shrewdly assessed, but everyone worked for himself, except for the conquered Indo-Europeans, systematically enslaved and what? Branded. You know what it means to be branded? You know what a hot brand is? Are they going to say, well, how you know it was a hot brand? Well, we're going to see. We're going to see what kind of brand it was. Because they want to play this bullshit like they were just servitude in Egypt. And that they were friendly and nice and warm and you know, punk motherfuckers. You feel me? That's really, because that's the image that people rock with when they deal with ancient Kemet. They can talk about Osiris and Horus and the gods and the fighting and all this other, but you can talk about the fighting up in heaven, in the heavens, in the clouds, but you can't talk about the fighting that took place on the ground. So let's say, here we go, look at this. Job continues, right? He said, now Job does say, he makes a distinction. He says, Egypt, unlike Greco-Roman and feudal societies, had no servile labor force. Now, I can say this. Although Job said that, I think Job should have stuck around a little longer to read Bernal's work, because Bernal definitely read his work. Martin Bernal, the author of Black Athena Slave, was branding her with a hot iron. Here's the hot iron. They would put it in a fire and it would brand her back. See right here, slave branding. Leeds Anti-Slavery Series number 23. That's a historical rendering. Slave branding. This is what happened to us. Job is telling you, in ancient Egypt, at the same time, the temples received tens of thousands of Aryan slaves branded with a hot iron. Who do you think they learned it from? Huh? Who do you think they learned how to conquer from? From us. Stop selling this weak image of ancient Egypt like they were a bunch of wearing faggots. Because they were not. You know, we get our symbols like Dr. Clark accused us of. He said we're too symbolic. He said, leave the goddamn symbols alone. That's what Dr. Clark said. We get caught up in all. If you want to get the full details, take my class at ShakkaAmosUniversity.com. It's called Black Masters, White Slaves. When you take that class, that's when you will see all the real, verifiable, attestable stuff. Okay? Because you got people that keep trying to present ancient Egypt as if they were a bunch of hippies that was just running around banging ankhs and had their feet folded on carpets doing Kemetic yoga and all this nonsense. And it's like, look, these people were conquerors. They enslaved white people. They made them work for free for generations. You understand? They branded them with hot irons and put them in chains. Made them fight their wars as well. Where do you think the white people learned it from? Slavery was an old institution in civilization. If white people were the last people to civilization, then they could only have learned it from the first people who created civilization.
White people, and had been doing this for 700 years, not the 400, 700 years. And I know Islam, they had slaves for 1,300 years, and not all, and some of their slaves were black, other blacks, and a lot of their slaves were whites. And they were saying how, like, during the Ottoman Empire, a lot of the white females were whored out, man, made into sex slaves. They not only trafficked white men, women, and children, but a lot of the white females were made into sex slaves. You know, but I mean, I've never seen a movie in the U.S. that showed brown complected people enslaving white people. So to me, man, when you admit that part of history that's out there, that's easily Googled, that's racism right there. You admit that. So why would you omit that? And the only time I've heard a white person talk about slavery, it's on 2 or 3 occasions. It's always the Irish saying that the England enslaved them. They will never talk about how either they don't know or they don't want to talk about. They'll never talk about how Africans enslaved some of the most powerful, what we know today as some of the most powerful European nations in the world. Africans enslaved England, Italy, Spain, France, the Netherlands, and took those people, 1.25 million, over to Africa for servitude. Like, they will never speak about that. I don't know if it's just a white pride thing, or maybe they just don't know. But as far as I've heard a white person go, the ones who will talk about, well, we were slaves too. They will mention about the Irish versus England having the Irish, because that's more white on white. So that doesn't take away so much pride. When you look at the people that you have in the, people today, where blacks are looked at today as being, submissive and being victims. I guess it's too hard for them to admit that people of my hue once had their ancestors in bondage, man, and enslaved the men, women, and children. Just like when they so-called had us on ships and brought us over, which I don't totally believe. But just like the same thing with us, like when they brought Africans to America. Whites were brought to Africa, made to be slaves as well.
Y'all hear me preaching, but y'all don't hear me. When you talk about the Waltons, when you talk about Walmart, you talk about the Waltons, who are all liberals, right? This is why they are for these type of policies. They're going to be rich no matter what forever, right? They got 28 billion. They're going to be rich no matter what forever, no matter how much you tax what they get from here on out. They already got 28 billion. You understand what I'm saying? So they're going to have generational wealth forever. They don't want you to ever be able to get up to where they at. I'm preaching, but y'all don't hear me, right? Do you think I would be for or against food stamps? Now, this is where I lose the black people at, right? Because black people would probably think, coming out of slavery, you would want a handout. I don't want no handout. I don't even want a hand up. Because the last thing I want from you is anything, because I don't want to be tied to you, because you just had me in shackles. I was just tied in your system for 400 years. Why on the hell would I want anything from you? So I would rather go out here and make it on my own. That way that anything that I get off the sweat of my own brow is mine, and I get to keep it. So of course I would be against food stamps. I would not be for food stamps. I would be against welfare. That anything that I get off the sweat of my own brow is mine, and I get to keep it. So of course I would be against food stamps. I would not be for food stamps. I would be against welfare. I would be 100% against welfare, because whoever pays you owns you, right? And don't nobody own me.
You know what I'm saying? So what my brother telling y'all, he's not joking, he's not playing. See, I'm a regular person. I'm a father like you. That's how we look.
Yeah, I got this thing on my lap.
Don't get it construed, don't get it misconstrued. He might look like he's stirring things up, but he's not. He's dealing with the truth. You know what I'm saying? And that's the truth. He can come over here, we don't care about him. We teach everybody, black man. We teach everybody, black man. You hear me? We teach everybody, man. Even the ones that are on the five. I got mad brothers. Salute. You know what I'm saying? Just to name a few. Y'all know him as Hellraiser. That's my brother Mark Cross. I'm from Brooklyn, Brownsville. Say no more. I seen it on your neck already. You know what I'm saying? We're gonna need you, brother, because they killing our youth out here. We about to give a press conference about that. You know what I'm saying? All walks of life, Israelites, atheists, Christian, this, that. It don't matter who. I want all of y'all to come get on board. You know what I'm saying? And this is the God. I'm gonna give it back to my man. Peace.
Thank you, my brother. That's my man Shy right there. Shy been doing this work for a long time. As you can see, we got a picture of white Jesus. And what we are doing is trying to free the minds of our people. This is the same best that's been raping our people for over 400 years. This is the image that when you get off the plane going to Africa, this is the first image you see, family. So we got to kill and destroy this image. When you really look at him, don't he look like a homosexual? Take a look at him. Don't this bastard look like a homosexual? So we sending this message out to all my people. Burn white Jesus. What we say? We say burn white Jesus. This is how we do it right here, live on 125th Street. Get it? Get it? Burn white Jesus. You want to say anything, brother?
Black power. This is what we need. We need that replenishment of the mind. You know what I'm talking about? They done robbed us mentally, physically, spiritually, socially, emotionally, culturally so much that we forgot who he is. And we looking at them for our judgment day, for our Savior. You know what I'm talking about? And we know that the black woman and black man is the only one that's going to be able to save our people. We can't depend on nobody else to do so. You understand? So this is what this is about. The birth of the European, that Caesar Borgia, whatever you want to call the man, whatever you want to call it. He ain't who we follow, and he ain't who came to save our people, to heal us from the stuff that we need to get healed from. Black power.
Black power. You want to say something, my brother Perry, in support of the burning of the white Jesus?
Yeah, black power, and I support.
So, I mean, it's a weird thing, man, but I think that's part of the mental brainwashing to make you think that, I mean, because, you know, when you know this, you tend to look at slavery from a different perspective. First, you don't look at white supremacy as the overall flawless God, like we're supposed to, like you hear some of these people, like, you know, the Neely Fullers and some of these authors, they talk about white supremacy being the most powerful force in the universe. You start to see holes in that armor when you know all of that, what happened. You start to see, oh, okay, maybe the white supremacy, because back when the white Europeans were brought to Africa for servitude, it was more like a Muslim versus Christian thing. But a lot of your Muslims were darker complected people. A lot of your Christians were white people. But you know, to see the whole thing in perspective, to see that, oh, wait a minute, whites were enslaved by blacks as well. You started to see that there's a hole in that white supremacist knowledge of thinking. Not to say that white supremacy doesn't exist today and that it doesn't have a strong hold on the planet and that it doesn't control a lot of what goes on in terms of the major areas of you know, productivity, you know, with education, you know, economics, you know, sex, religion, things of that nature. Now, it's not to say it doesn't have that stronghold in those areas, but it does show that it is not flawless, and it hasn't been the flawless force that's existed through, you know, because before, I mean, as a kid, by seeing blacks being slaves in every movie, I was thinking, well, white people have probably been the masters of the universe since the Ice Age. And blacks have just been slaves since the beginning of time, and that's just the way things are supposed to be. You know, that's what they put, that's part of that brainwashing that they do. You know, that's the kind of brainwashing that can cause. And Stockholm syndrome can set in very, very strongly as well through that type of thinking. But when you sit in hindsight and say, oh, okay, they were slaves too, by people who look like me, with the wide noses. Not saying they were my people, so to speak, but they were enslaved by brown-complected people, all of Europe. And a large number of whites were enslaved. Then you look at it as just, so maybe it's just your turn now. So it is possible for people of my hue to be on top and to enslave you. It changes the dynamic. You know, you're not looked at as, oh, my only place on the planet is to be servitude, to be of service to you. You know, so to speak. My people have always been slaves, etc., etc. And that's what they try to teach through that Christian Bible, which I can see why Japan and China have all outlawed Christianity, because they know that they know about this powerful brainwashing techniques. And they've seen what Christianity has done to the black race. But I just thought I'd share that with you guys, man. Let me know what you think. If you've heard or you've seen brown-complected people enslave white people. Like I said, if it is out there, it's not a blockbuster. It was made with a low budget, and only a few people was able to see it. I've never heard of it. I've never seen it. It may be an old movie, but if you know of a movie out there that shows white bondage, let me know about it. Make sure to like, subscribe. Give me
kindest race of the ancient world was that of the Egyptians. And if we direct our course to the Nile Valley, now hold on, let's start with the first thing.
That was not a mistake, brother. He knows what he's doing.
Hold on.
Do you think that was a mistake that he doing that?
Hold on, listen to this. Listen to this.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Watch.
He meant to do that.
Who's
him? That's the white boy, right?
Yeah, Arthur Weagle.
He's trying to shape the mold, the mind of it.
I'm gonna show you where he got it from. No, hold on. I'm gonna show you where he got it from. Watch. He said this: the kindest race in the ancient world was that of the Egyptians. And if we direct our course to the Nile Valley 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, we shall find conditions there so humane that instances of pharaonic cruelty, such as we have been shown in some recent film dramas, will be seen at once to reflect the mentality of the producer and not that of the people he thought to portray. The Egyptians were seldom consciously cruel. They did not grind men to pulp under the wheels of their juggernauts. They did not lash their laboring serfs. They did not torture people. They did not callously inflict death upon anybody. In fact, they never did any of the things of this sort which the film producers are at such pains to present to us. Now, from everything that I showed you prior to this, did that sound like thousands of people being sold into slavery? If they enslaved thousands of people, that's slavery, right? The state of being a slave, that's slavery, right? Exhausting labor or restricted freedom, that's slavery, right? The practice or system of owning slaves, it's slavery. New Oxford American Dictionary, go look it up. That's by Garfield. He said, I don't think, he said, and slavery itself as we define it today. I don't think Egypt was doing that per se. Well, folks, this is part 4 from the course that I teach, that I recommend you people start taking so that you can stop making errors and mistakes. Because you know Shakka gonna get you every time. That's what I do. Okay? Part 4, Black Masters and White Slaves. If you want to take this course, all you have to do is go to ShakkaAhmoseUniversity.com. ShakkaAhmoseUniversity.com. Don't cut that out, because if you do, you will never get another interview from me. Here we go. For white supremacy. But she never touched on the fact that we enslaved them more than once in our history. And here's the other thing nobody ever talks about. Sir, they never forgot it. They never forgot it. That's the sneaky part with white people. They never forgot it. And what they've done over the years is they've used Hollywood and their access to the media to constantly subliminally remind themselves.
Let me ask you a question. Sure. So now that we're dealing with slavery, what is your take on reparations? What do you think about reparations? You have a group of black brothers fighting for reparations. Should we forget reparations at this point? I'm saying we ain't gonna never get reparations until we get back in power. That's what I'm saying. The white man don't give a damn about us getting reparations. And if he do give it back to us, how do we get it? Who is the reparations for? Because we are so scattered throughout the land. You know, you got Moors that say, oh, we ain't never been enslaved, I'm not black. So we disassociate. Then you got Hebrews that say, well, you know, fuck them Africans, I'm not Africans, I'm not black. So we are all scattered as a people. So when reparations finally, let's say the white men say, all right, we're going to give you Negroes reparations. Who get the reparations? How is it disseminated amongst all of us where we all can benefit like the so-called Jews? They benefit, you see? How do we benefit if we get it?
I think that's a very good question. The first thing that we have to do is this. We have to properly identify how we define reparations. And why is that important? Well, that's one part of the tier, identifying it properly. The second part of the tier, I want to address it with the first thing you said. I want to address the fact that you said we are all disparate. We're scattered all over the place. But let me explain something to you that I've learned about white people. With white people, when they want to get something done, the only thing that really matters are those white people that matter. They identify the white people that matter, and then they push something through. The white people that don't matter, you never hear them mention them anyway. They're just, you know, if you don't figure into our plan, if you don't figure into our strategy, you don't matter, you don't count anyway. But the most intelligent thing about the white people that matter is everybody has a place in their plan. Everybody has a function in their plan. You might not like your function in their plan, but trust me, they got a little something for everybody. But the most important thing about those white people is that they know which white people matter. If you don't believe me, look at Trump's new tax plan. He knows which white people matter and which ones don't, right? He spit right in the face of the very white people that put him in power. I can locate what qualifies as assets today. Because if they just give us money as reparations, money is not necessarily assets if you don't know how to manage it and what to do with it. So there are things that we can perhaps demand. There are things that we can demand as reparations that don't necessarily have to equate with money. But as long as we can identify it as an asset, then we can say, yeah, we want that. No, keep your money. We want this. Why? Because that's an asset. We want this. Only the European is badass enough to enslave people. Everybody else in history was sissies. They couldn't conquer. They couldn't enslave other people. They couldn't take their woman and kill their children or castrate them or do the things that people do when they conquer. You understand? We've had that part of us ripped out of us so bad, so much, that we can't even conceptualize it in just discussion. Because we're too busy, from my perspective, trying to protect this manufactured romantic reputation that we actually got. Because what you're going to find out is that the idea of the ancient Egyptians not being warlike, not being enslavers, you're going to find out that that actually came from white people, from 19th century Germans. Watch, because I'm going to show you the documentation, okay? You see, they don't want to show you what you were like when you were warlike. You use the term warriors, but then when we start talking warrior language, you want to go back to, no, we were just waving ankhs. We were just doing comedic yoga on the beach. You understand what I'm saying? We're a bunch of, what they're trying to do is they're trying to sell you a form of hippieism. They're trying to turn ancient Kemet into a form of hippieism. A bunch of hippies. You understand? That's what they're doing. And that's what my argument is against. They're trying to tell you, oh, you know, all this new age metaphysical bullshit. That's how they're framing ancient Kemet for you. And I'm saying no. Not me, the documentation is saying no. Now I'm going to tell you something before I proceed. In a wonderful conversation that I had with my brother Jabari, I asked him, I said, the truth cannot be told yet. We got to sit on the truth because we haven't punished white people yet. We have to sit on the truth because this is his logic and his reason out of his own mouth. We can't tell the truth because we haven't received reparations yet. I got a question. Is it white people's fault that we haven't received reparations yet? No. Whose fault is it?
It's our fault, man.
Say it again?
It's our fault as a people, yes.
You know why? It's our fault? For the mere fact that you are waiting for reparations tells you what the white man did to you. He made you a bitch and a pussy. That you would wait for reparations. You know damn well if your brother or your sister owed you $1,000, you wouldn't be waiting. How long you gonna wait? And when you see it, if your brother and sister says, oh, fuck you, I ain't giving you nothing. Yo, what happens in the hood if you owe somebody $1,500 and you say, man, you ain't getting shit? Hey, what happens?
You're going to get it in blood. Something happened.
Something going to happen, right? Now, how many years black people been waiting for reparations?
For like damn near 300 years.
Right? Now, hold on. You see, it goes back to the whole narrative. I'm trying to tell you that black people were once conquerors.
100 and something years.
100 some odd years, right? About 200 years, right? Look, 150 years. Black people. I'm trying to give you a narrative of black people for the documentation being conquerors. Enslaving people, right? Do conquerors wait for reparations?
No, hell no.
I'm asking you. Do conquerors wait for reparations?
No, they go and take their shit.
Oh, you see, it's really at the heart of the matter.
This is why the European on top, because he came and took his shit.
Exactly. You see, this is this is the real conversation that they don't want to have. Because when you start talking about ancient Egypt enslaving people in Africa, Europeans, that means you're talking about them as conquerors. Conquerors don't wait for shit. So you can't be saying Hotep and Kemet and throwing ankhs around, but because if you do, then you want to play it safe. you want to say, yeah, but we were nice people. We were kind people. We were just harmless people. You know? We just did yoga. We just banged ankhs together and did all this symbolic bullshit. That's all we did. That's the conversation they want to have. You understand what I'm saying? But when you try to present the ancient Egyptians as men, as warriors, as soldiers, as generals, as conquerors, you understand? When you try to present them Africans as that, do you think a white man wants you to present Africans like that? No, he's going to do what? He's going to make up a narrative that you were kind, and that you were gentle, and that's right, that you were passive. You see what I'm saying about psychology, how deep the shit runs? We're so worried about Hebrew Israelites taking it and running with it, we don't see what we're doing to ourselves by running away from it. No, you gotta embrace it. You gotta look that cracker in his face, pardon me, you gotta look, I don't need to be disrespectful. You got, because there don't need to be when you telling the truth. There don't need to be disrespectful. The truth means the truth says what it says. You gotta look that white man in his face, and when he brings up slavery, you ask him, you mean when my people owned yours, or when your people owned mine? Let's get the facts straight, because I want to know what period of slavery you're talking about.